Great. So today we have Dr. Craig Buhler, and he used to be the doctor at the Utah Jazz for the NBA team. And Dr. Buhler has over 24 years of working experience with the NBA. You only worked with one team, is that correct?
Correct. But
Okay,
I also worked with the U.S. ski team and then various like Stanford's women's swim team for a couple of years. So I've had some really great experiences with elite athletes through the years.
great. I want to start off by asking how you first became involved in working with Utah Jazz and what drew them to your approach.
Well, I graduated from chiropractic college and I took my Utah boards and I opened up a practice in April. And in May, I leased an office space next to a chiropractor that
Hmm.
had been in practice for years. When in New Orleans, they used a chiropractor for different conditions. And when they moved to Salt Lake, this chiropractor happened to be friends with the chiropractor that I leased space from. I was in practice for about 2 months, and I get a phone call from this chiropractor, and he said, "Would you be interested in working with the basketball team?" I said, "Well, sure." Well, Don Sparks came over, the trainer for the Jazz, and interviewed me. And I worked on some problems he had and solved it using this work. And he was so impressed. The next week, he brought in his premier forward, Adrian Dantley, and that was my in with the Jazz. So it was, just the fact that I was leasing space next to a chiropractor that was friends with a chiropractor in New Orleans is pretty remarkable. That allowed me to work closely with the medical staff and the training staff. And it took a couple of years before players embraced this work, but once they saw the value, I treated all of them.
I see. So what was the problem at the time that wasn't able to be solved, but you were able to solve it for them?
Well, it's like Adrian Dantley had chronic low back pain all through college
Okay.
and then into the pros. And when I evaluated him, he had a 1 inch short leg.
Mm.
So he was competing with a short leg, and that was affecting the SI joint and the low back. I balanced the muscles in the low back and put him in a heel lift. We had to modify the shoe and also put a lift in order to balance his pelvis. And after that, he was pain free.
Oh, wow. I saw there was a story from John Stockton talking about his ankle sprains, and you were able to miraculously fix it almost instantaneously. Can you talk about that?
Sure, I'd love to. Through Stockton's career, it is a contact sport, as you know, right?
Right.
And so they get hammered in there. And John is a small guard, and he got a reputation for being a dirty player, but it was because he would set such hard picks on those big guys that it really irritated him. But when I first started working with him, I did a full body exam and found a lot of different imbalances that he had accumulated through high school and college. And so he was balanced. And when he sprained that ankle, which is on YouTube, if you see it, it's pretty severe.
Yes.
We went in the locker room and the trainer evaluated him and didn't think he'd fractured anything, but he told Stockton, he said, you're done for tonight and probably the next few weeks. Well, Stockton said, Bueller, I want you to work on me. So I evaluated him. In an inversion sprain, the talus, the top bone in the ankle, actually torques. And the lateral stabilizing muscles, usually the pronaos longus group, because you're usually in plantar flexion when you sprain it, they become inhibited. And then they splint to try to create stability. So after that injury, you're walking on a joint that's not tracking properly, and the pain centers within the joint capsule keep firing, and the muscles are splinting to try to create some sense of stability. So what I do is I manipulate the talus back in alignment so it tracks properly. And then through the work that we've developed, we reactivate a number of neurological reflex points and reactivate those muscles. So we start with a muscle that's weak. In fact, that when I was testing the proneal muscles, he was shaking. He was in so much pain. And after I got through treating it, I re-challenged it, completely solid, no pain. They taped him. He played the fourth quarter, and then he played a full game the next night on an ankle that had been severely sprained the night before. It's a different way of looking at an injury and having the process of managing that so that you reestablish the neurological and proprioceptive integrity, not only to the joint, but also to the muscle system.
So what you are seeing and also observing is that when an athlete, for example, they suffer an injury, there will be muscles and or muscle groups that are going to be inhibited.
Yes,
This is a neurological compensatory pattern.
yes. And it
Yeah.
changes everything about how we approach athletic injuries and orthopedic conditions. The idea that muscles can become proprioceptively inhibited as a protective mechanism changes everything.
Right. What do you say? I mean, one of the question to a lot of the younger therapists or trainers or coaches would be the athlete was doing a dorsiflexion drill with, bands or some weight. Let's say they get a injury to the ankle. Would the same exercise produce the same benefit after the injury?
No, because you can't strengthen a muscle that's become inhibited. All you'll do is overstrengthen the muscles that are still working to compensate more effectively for the ones that aren't.
Right. That's something we totally get it from a fascia perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think it's being talked about enough in the mainstream, especially today in social media. You see so many PT account which prescribe exercises. Oh, you twist your ankle, you do this exercise, that exercise, but he never talks about, oh, you know what? If your muscle is inhibited because of damages, that exercise doesn't do anything.
Well, then, how do they explain chronic ankle instability, which is a common condition that people who sprain their ankles experience? And the reason it's chronic ankle instability is the muscles don't engage. If you isolate those muscles through a muscle test, that's like there's a complete disconnect. And the other thing that's really important to understand too, and I find that the medical doctors don't read the literature because over the past 20 years, there's been a phenomena that's published in so many journal articles about what's called arthrogenic muscle inhibition. They first started looking at that with athletes who had ACL replacement surgery. And
Mm,
they found that a large percentage of those athletes, whether it was 6 months, a year and a half out, they still couldn't contract their quadriceps. So then they started looking at the joint capsule. And they found that anytime a joint becomes irritated, inflamed, or damaged in any way, any muscle that attached to the joint or cross over the joint becomes inhibited. And they call that arthrogenic muscle inhibition. So they've tried different things to try to override that, like ice and different pain meds and even dry needling and such.
hmm
And to date, they've had poor results. The other thing that's interesting is up till about 1997, the literature read that except for articular surfaces, all tissues are richly endowed with proprioceptors, nociceptors. And then CORE came up with a new staining procedure and found that the capsule was just loaded with proprioceptive and mechanoreceptors. So then the conclusion in that article was that surgeons needed to be careful about maintaining the integrity of that joint surface. So rather than going in and grinding things off if there's a little defect, they were more careful to maintain the integrity of that capsule. So that was many years ago, and yet we still deal with that. So when you consider an ankle sprain, when the talus torques, that stresses that joint capsule. So any muscle that across over that joint can become inhibited as well. And so if you manipulate that joint back into alignment so it tracks properly, you interrupt that arthrogenic muscle inhibition and everything just works better. And so chronic ankle instabilities disappear.
Fantastic insight. Can you talk about how did you come up with this method? What was the problem that you were trying to address in the first place?